Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Mr. DB333, and welcome back to Hearts of Iron 4, New Order, Last Days of Europe as the United Kingdom. Well, last video, we started working on passing the Freedom Security Act. We got approval from Lords. We're also figuring out who exactly our enemy is. And then from there, we're kind of just, trying to stay alive. Really. So let's do a check-in with Germania. Well, we always do not agree on everything with our German brothers. They still did liberate Britain and are the unquestioned saviors and masters of Europe. Over the years, the garrison has become just as active as a part of the government as any other. And plenipotentiary Wesenmeyer has been instrumental in our affairs. For these reasons, we will functionally need German approval if we wish to push back against the resistance, especially since we require the garrison to assist us with it. Therefore, we'll meet with Wesenmeyer and Wolf both, and inform them of our new anti-partisan policies and request approval and assistance. It isn't as though they will have any real objections to fighting the terrorists. Right? You can hope. Let's go up to speed. Like all good National Socialists, Edmund Wesenmeyer felt a cold chill run down his spine at the moment he heard that Hitler had been struck. Images of the worst-case scenario appeared in the set, the fatherland turning into ash as it was overrun by liberal Judeo-Bolsheviks, while he was trapped there, powerless to help stop it. Thankfully, the Fuhrer had survived, and such an event had not come to pass. Nodding at the two men who had brought him this news, he walked shakily back to his desk. Much was on the mind of the plenipotentiary of the Reich to Britain. He had spent 7 years of his life on his island, 7 long, unforgiving years that he had spent dealing with the whims and tantrums of these stupid people. The mighty German garrison had thrown everything it had alongside their puppets in Downing Street to squash the Jewish rats opposing the Reich. And Wesenmeyer had been there all the way. It was a harsh and unforgiving job. He wished more than anything to be given the order to simply set Wolf and Wiegand upon anyone even remotely treacherous, so that he could deliver Britain entirely into the Reich's hands. He frowned. The Reich itself was starting to buckle. He made it his business to keep up to date with what was happening in the fatherland, and the news he received was almost always negative. Students running amok, the Fuhrer's evil advisors jockeying for power, the butchers under Heydrich growing ever stronger. If such things continued to happen, and God forbid the Fuhrer were to die, then the Reich would be plunged into chaos. What would that mean for Britain? Would the Jew prevail in the end? No, it couldn't be so. He shook his head, steeling himself. It would keep Britain in very, very close to the Reich. Whether she wanted to be kept in golden cage or dragged in chains, it mattered little to Wesenmeyer. He had almost been doing this for a decade already. May as well finish the job. Britain's Galler readies her leech. The PM and the Foreign Secretary gracefully walked into the specified meeting room with the Reich plenipotentiary and the commanding general. It started off cordial, not really getting on topic until 10 minutes after Donville and Nal Kane entered the room. Nal Kane started, hoping to update the Germans on the rebel situation. Well, thank you, but the Prime Minister and I came to address both of you on the topic of the increased accounts of rebellious activities within Britain. I'll let them handle this. Donville cleared his throat. Gentlemen, let me make one thing clear. What is happening now will never, under my leadership, escalate to something seen under the leadership of Chesterton or any former governments. There will be no widespread rebellion. What the people of Britain are experiencing now is simply just bandits and thugs, bringing havoc across the nation. I assure all of you this will not escalate. Both Germans nodded their head. Wesenmeyer seemed satisfied, granting Donville a handshake. Wolf, on the other hand, was hesitant. You seem exceptionally confident, and I would be willing to pledge the support of the garrison to your government. However, in return, we expect the Wehrmacht to be granted command of the garrison's officers. Donville's face fell, but he tried not to let it show. Another area of governance relinquished to Germania was nothing new. Of course, this is not to imply British officers are incompetent. Wolf continued, a smug flicker in his eyes. German soldiers require German leaders, after all. I trust this is acceptable? Donville sighed internally, knowing he had little choice. You have a deal. A vain man is not something many would describe Harold Macmillan as. The Edwardian sensibility of the old man prevented such a thing. Yet as he sat in his office listening to the words he had spoken only hours earlier through the radio, he could not help but berate himself for such an indulgence. And now, in these hours darker than ever before, we can only keep steady and brace ourselves for what may hopefully be the sunlight, shining through the clouds. Thank you. God save the Queen. The fuzzy sound of applause followed. And that was Harold Macmillan, leader of the Conservative Party in exile, speaking at the annual Commonwealth Conference, supplied a rather nasal commentator. This has been the third speech that Mr. Macmillan has made on the topic of the British government in the last 5 months. Our sources have no. The presenter was quickly silenced and Macmillan switched off the radio. Did they truly see him as naught but a desperate, aimless old man with nothing better to do than whittle on about the same old injustices ad nauseum? He sighed at the thought. Perhaps they were right. He was king of the exiles after all. There had been hope at the start. He remembered the righteous, burning anger that each and every Englishman worth his salt felt at their beloved nation being invaded by the Nazi scum. He remembered the fire in the eyes of every one of his fellow MPs that sought to reclaim their birthright, to see the collaborator dogs flung in jail for their crimes. By God, what he would give to give that to them. And yet, as the year drew on, that fire dimmed. None of them grew any happier of the situation, but some amongst them simply felt that there was nothing more that could be done to save their country. There'd been some hope for change in the 50s, when the fascist idiots inevitably tied themselves into one too many knots, but that was only temporary. When it appeared the situation had begun to stabilize, the malaise of the exiles got even worse. Sometimes even he began to wonder, was it all worth it? Macmillan shook his head, getting up from his chair and walking over to the cabinet he kept in the corner of the room. He pulled out a large bottle of brandy and poured out himself a small glass. By no means did he drink as much as Churchill did. He sipped it gently, letting the bitter drink sting his tongue. He had to keep going. The Conservatives had to keep going. They would all keep going until the homeland was inevitably won back, where both he and his party would finally be able to redeem himself. For Queen and Country. Next up, let's do Maclean's Marauders. Fitzroy Maclean and his merry men have been marauding around the countryside like mad dogs ever since we put down their former leader Sterling in 56. Their hands are stained with British blood, and they have been allowed to just roam the Scottish Highlands without any punishment. The hour of reckoning for these murderers approaches. We've managed to track them to the Scottish Highlands, where they've been hiding in the mountains for some time now. The whole area will be seized and placed under military control. We'll let our own mad dogs of PFC loose inside the restricted zone, and we'll handle these terrorists once and for all. I see nothing that could go wrong here. Across all of Britain, on factory floors to ramshackle houses, the people go quiet just for an hour. And as so many of them listen anxiously on their battered radios, for it is at this time, every Tuesday at 1900 pronto, a broadcast goes out. It speaks of the tireless work of Britons standing up to fascism, of working past the failures of old tired men, and of a new better Britain emerging from the ashes, not one tied down by its failings, but pushed forward by its people. This broadcast did not come from Britain, nor was it an old resistant general, nor an old politician from the war. In fact, it was given by the asthmatic former journalist, the man who now stands at the head of the exiled Labour Party, Michael Foot. As he finishes his broadcast every week, he cannot help but feel a tinge of guilt for hiding away in Canada, while the brave resistance members continue to fight. Foot had risen to lead the Labour Party in exile, mainly because very few wanted the role. So many of his exiles had given up after the failures of the 50s, and had simply given up hope for a free Britain. The long wait had destroyed so many exiles' hopes for a better Britain, hope for the liberation of the old world. Yet Foot, even in his darkest days, when he heard Beaverbrook, his old mentor, had died, never really gave up hope. How could he, when he give up faith when so many Britons continue to fight, to die against the tyranny of the BPP and their Nazi puppet masters. His peers call him a fool, a hopeless romantic, for continuing to dream of a free Britain, but he has faith. History has shown that tyranny does not prosper forever. All great dictators eventually fall to the will of the people. When that day comes, when Britain is finally liberated, it will finally be Foot's time to work for the people of Britain, to repay his everlasting debt to all those who have died and who continue to fight to create a new Jerusalem from the ashes of fascism. Hope comes in undulating waves. Turn Scotland into an exclusion zone. I mean, isn't Dundee basically an exclusion zone already, basically? Or is that Glasgow? I did a couple of them, actually. Roger smirked as the Free Corps platoon drudged through the heath. John had been leading them on a merry chase from Loch Leven, and now their plan was coming to fruition. Worming his way back through the scrub, Roger signaled to Will to the radio off to the second squad further north. A brief statically murmur filled the radio and all was ready. Smirking Will, Roger popped his head above the heath and gave a sudden holler. The Free Corps men almost squawked in surprise, swinging their hand-me-down gevers around to face Roger as he ducked down below the heath again and began to sprint up north. As a hail of rifle fire filled the air, Roger ducked up again. For nearly half an hour, he lured the Free Corps men up the old bank of the heath, serving as a perfect cover for movement. All the while, Fort William Road drew near. Suddenly, Roger sprinted out onto a bare stretch of ground. The road was right ahead of him, and behind him he could hear the Free Corps bundling forwards. This was the most dangerous stretch of the plan. Roger threw his entire body into the sprint, running at full force towards the concealed foxhole. A sudden crack of a rifle behind him forced Roger even more into the long run. There he passed the safety line, and he hit the ground. The sudden scream of a trio of machine guns filled the air as the first and second squads opened fire. Roger could feel the power of the thuds thundering through the earth as he dug into the dirt. A lonely rifle shot was fired and then all fell silent. Pushing himself up, Roger looked behind him at the steaming corpses of the Free Corps men. Really effective crackdown, eh, Roger? John snarked as he strode down, steam rising from the Bren gun in his eyes. Dunville's just kicking off the Free Corps, ain't he? Roger replied as he dusted himself off. Hey, could just be a crackdown on the Free Corps. The laugh came from the two squads was suddenly cut off as a drone from a helicopter filled the air. By the time it got there, only the dead remained. Well, so much for shutting them down. Let's try Jones' Jacobins. Bolshevism has always been one of Britain's chief enemies, and while it historically remained thankfully free of the cancerous ideology, it does not mean that proponents of such belief do not infest our nation. The left resistance and their leader Jack Jones are the more insidious side of the resistance. They hide in our factories, whispering their honeyed wars into the ears of honest workmen, turning them against us. The rot goes deep, and if we wish to stand any chance of beating the resistance wholesale, then we must rip their agitators and unsanctioned trade unions out by the root. Thankfully, the Gestapo have proven more than eager to aid us in this endeavor. They shall be sent to known hotspots of Bolshevik activity, where they will monitor for activity before raising it to the ground. There we go. Stuffy storm in a damp, ill-lit warehouse was, besides one of Manchester's numerous Reichswerke steel factories, was hardly a pleasant location for a clandestine meeting, but it was a secure one, and for the senior members of Manchester's Underground Industrial Union, that was worth far more than comfort. So how's it looking, John? All you lads on a shift, ain't it? Shift A in. I thought we were trying to say, like, in it, but that's not. Sorry. Asked Stephen, the unofficial leader of unionized drivers, responsible for taking the steel to the dockyards before it was shipped off to feed the endless hunger of the Reich military. Aye, they are, replied John, a floor manager for the main factory right opposite the warehouse. He'd been slowly recruiting workers to their cause since taking up the mantle from his predecessor, dead in the uprising of '56. The room fell quiet as a man at the head of a table moved to speak. Unlike the others, the union's general secretary had no position in the Reichswerke. He was, in fact, currently wanted for high treason, but instead worked solely for the union and the left resistance. Then we're set to proceed when called. I'll tell Jones that Manchester stands ready for the revolution, he said, passing around the report he'd been reading with a smirk. The fascist bastards have lent us have lent us a helping hand, it seems, he joked, as the paper was passed from hand to hand, drawing a mixture of reactions, but all positive. Our recruitment rate has soared since they called in those Gestapo buggers and to try to root us out. Random interrogations and intimidation don't seem to be working too well for the Krauts. Finding its way back to the General Secretary before long, the meeting soon concluded, and its attendees vanished back into the night. The following morning, most returned to working and faking contentment under the arrogant gaze of their German overseers, but one thought was on all their minds. It was a thought spreading across the minds of every worker chafing under Nazi yoke. Soon, the swine will pay. Next, we have the question of who is the boss? Is there a man that lies beyond the veil of which we are yet to pierce? If such a man exists, then his discovery would make our efforts a guaranteed success. There's something rotten in the United Kingdom. Under the myriad layers of resistance, there lies a supposed brain behind the bronze. A spider at the center of the web, a puppet master who hides in the shadows, quietly manipulating the ebb and flow of a movement. They have eluded detection for as long as we can remember, and even the likes of Jones and McLean kowtow before them. The individual is undoubtedly the head of a snake, and we know them as the boss. Despite our best efforts, we have been able to uncover literally nothing about the boss. He, or possibly even she, for that matter, is a nigh-mythical figure within the resistance. Despite this, next to nobody has ever spoken to the man. And his identity is unknown to anyone, save for perhaps the terrible twins. Whoever it is, they are doubtlessly mastermind of the highest order to keep the resistance alive after all these years. This is, of course, assuming that the boss is real. We cannot be too hasty in assuming that he's not simply cover for a series of individuals, or simply a story. And unless MI5 will launch an investigation to uncover just who the boss is, if he's real at all, that is. It's Peter the Third. I'm calling it. It's going to be Peter the Third. The cat. The Prime Minister of Australia's resigned? Petsk prison breakout. Domville sat in his office, stewing away in his own paranoia. Day after day, more reports came in, reporting new attacks from resistance where the culprits struck in an instant and then seemingly melted away in the shadows. With the brutal massacres he was seeing from sunrise to sunset, the Prime Minister was starting to reach a breaking point. He needed the man in the center of it all. The boss, the leader, whatever they called themselves. He needed to be gone. There's only one man he could trust to properly settle the matter. 3 hard knocks scraped on the door. He stood up, inviting none other than Maxwell Knighton. The man smiled thinly, nodding his head. Drink? Knight shook his head. Very well. Maxwell, you are here for only one reason, and I am sure you can understand why. Knight shook his head. Everything on paper you sent that could have been related was redacted from my eyes, I'm afraid. So no, I am unaware. Maxwell, these reports of resistant activity that keep on appearing on my desk must stop. There's only one way to make that happen. You and the MI5 have only one objective, look into the existence of the individual leading them. The boss, he's called. If they do exist, you find them and hang them by the neck for the British people to point and laugh at. You hear me? Director General's face was impassive until the mention of the Resistance's supposed leader, wherein he began to look much more interested. He stood up. I must admit, Prime Minister, I have been blighted by the existence of this individual as much as you. I swear to you, I will track the boss down. By the time I am through with him, the entire nation will know who he is. Domville sighed one last sigh of relief, something he hadn't done in at least half a year. Next, the Freedom of Security Act. You're like, well, we can't do so. Yeah. The Freedom of Security Act is the last piece of legislation needed to finally snuff out the resistance for good. While we have had a steady stream of support for the bill in the House of Lords and our German benefactors for months, the House of Commons has finally come to its senses and decided to pledge its support for the bill. It's time to take off the silken gloves. We've been far too tolerant and careful in dealing with the rebels still scurrying around Britain. With the momentum the resistance appears to be been gaining as of late, it is frighteningly plausible to suggest that another mass revolt may soon be on its way. The possibility is one we must smother immediately. We cannot allow these thugs and hooligans to tear apart everything the BPP has built for the nation. Not now, not ever. God save the king. Fidel Castro wins the election. Over the course of a single day, Britain saw the most radical transformation of her law and order legislation since the establishment of German garrison, something unthinkable in the Parliament of old. But this wasn't the Parliament of old. The outcome had been decided long in advance. MPs from all factions of BPP said their agreed upon pieces, and all eventually voted in favor at the appointed time. True opposition voices in both chambers left completely powerless. The entire system was a scam, a farce, a pantomime where all the actors stayed on script and performed their assigned roles night after night, all dispute kept hidden behind the curtains to an audience who no longer bothered to watch the inevitable conclusion of the performance. The corpse of democracy, shambling along at its director's request. But not even the producer of this morbid play left the theater happy. Domville had every reason to celebrate the closure of another act. All his efforts had paid off after all. Finally, the chains restraining Britain's guardians had been broken, and Domville could fully unleash her defenders upon those who would do her harm. A perfect victory, but something was still off. Domville couldn't quite place it as his motorcade sped through the quiet streets of London. It had given too much away to Fontaine and Butler, and had not been firm enough with the Lords. He kowtowed too quickly to Germania. The source of his troubles eluded him. It was only as his car swung into Downing Street and he saw a knight standing outside, a grim look on his face and a report in his hand, that Domville realized what gnawed at him. It was fear. Fear that the act wasn't enough, that was just a piece of paper hurled at an oncoming hurricane. One that would tear apart all he had built with nature's righteous fury. One that was coming for him, and coming soon. A storm brews. Well, it seems we will have to figure this all out next time. Firing a shotgun at a hurricane. True. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and leave it there, my friends. But thanks as always for watching. If you like this video, like. If not, feel free to dislike. If you want to see more of this content in the future, hit the sub button for uploads weekdays as well as occasionally Saturdays. If you have any comments, feedback, future series, anything of the sort, leave them in the comment section below. I read all comments again. Appreciate any and all feedback you may have for me. That's pretty much the gist of it, I'd say. Check my various links, and yeah, thank you all for watching as always, my friends. My name has been Mr. Dogbout333, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye now.